This short video will be discussing the principle of kinesiology, or if we break this word down, kines meaning movement, ology meaning study of, or the study of movement. So the first thing that we're going to talk about in our study of movement, our simple study of movement, is just going to be why we contract a muscle. So just realize, and I think that you know this at this point of your schooling career, but we're going to generally contract a muscle for one of three reasons: to accomplish movement, to resist a movement, or to stabilize or fixate a body part, usually in connection with one of these two, as moving a body part or resisting a movement. Just as a short review, we're going to go ahead and I found this short little video clip to review our types of muscle contraction. These white guys on the inside are going to be acting like our myosin heads. We have the actin running through the muscle. Our concentric contraction is going to result in muscle shortening. Hopefully you know this by now. Our eccentric contraction, let me pause that here. Our eccentric contraction is going to still be a contraction while the muscle lengthens. So the force on the outside is going to be lengthening the muscle during contraction. So here again we represent our concentric, eccentric. Concentric, pulling, eccentric, lengthening. The last one we're going to highlight here is an isometric hold. I just lost it. Our isometric hold, which is going to be where the muscle contraction maintains the same amount of force as the tension on the outside. And our last principle of relaxation. So this is just one more visual of the concentric and the eccentric contractions. Eccentric, the muscle lengthens. Concentric, the muscle shortens. This is a nice bicep curl. It's probably the most commonly used in referring to types of muscle movement with the concentric and eccentric contractions. So we're going to come back to our PowerPoint slides and just roll through these. Take a second and just go ahead and look at these slides, kind of go through and just refamiliarize yourself with some of these principles. One thing I would like you to take a moment and look at is the advantages and disadvantages of each type of muscle contraction. Just realize, isometrics often are overlooked. However, there are some really good benefits to our isometric contractions, and we use them frequently in terms of rehabilitation or other types of medical settings, especially in places where people don't have a full range of motion. We can still practice muscle strengthening even if a person doesn't have full range of motions through isometric exercise. So just take a second, know 3, 4, 5 of these. Look at the disadvantages. Make sure you can kind of talk about those. We'll keep scrolling through here. Our isotonic contractions, or same tone, same force. This is going to be our concentric and our eccentric contractions. Again, there's going to be our advantages and our disadvantages. Take a second, know a couple of these. Just realize our isotonic exercises, our isotonic muscle contractions, these are the ones that we use all day, every day. We also use isometrics, we just tend to think of them less. But these are the ones, when we go to the gym, when we're walking around, these are the ones we tend to think of as our concentric and eccentric contractions. One last one that was not represented in the video, but you might have heard of, is an isokinetic contraction, or a same speed, same movement contraction. For this class, we won't worry as much about this one. Clinically, I have never seen this. In research, I have seen this more frequently. It's still out there. It's still important. We've actually learned some really cool things from isokinetic contractions. But again, clinically, this is not something I have ever seen, and it's not something I've even ever heard of, mainly because these machines, so this is an isokinetic machine. This is a lever that will move the person's leg at the same speed, and they are able to just move against the force. So these machines are very expensive. I don't think that they are very conducive to clinical medicine. But like I've said, we've actually learned some really cool things about muscle contractions because of isokinetic exercises and principles. So again, there's some advantages and disadvantages. This is one of those cool things that we've kind of learned because of isokinetic exercises. And then just as a refresher, these are terms that you've heard, I'm sure that you've used. Just take a second, go through them, make sure you're familiar with these, specifically our agonists and our antagonists. We will talk about the other things, but for the purpose of our kines in this class, we're going to try to keep things simple, specifically looking at agonists, the main muscle mover of a movement. So go ahead and just review those quickly. So those are the basic principles of kinesiology. In our quest to accomplish osteokinematic motion, how we use our muscles to accomplish that. So realize it can get complicated fairly quickly. One of the things that complicates our kinesiology so quickly is just the amount of muscles, the origin, insertions, and actions of each of these muscles that you need to know, as well as their effect on a joint, causing knee flexion or knee extension or hip abduction or adduction or any type of rotation, as well as bringing in the forces that you need to know that are acting on the body at any given moment. So I brought this up here so just as a reminder, know these superficial muscle groups, be able to recall these easily maybe or quickly. Just make sure that you're comfortable with our superficial muscle groups. This is our posterior view. We have a nice anterior view here. So just to demonstrate and highlight how this can get complicated very quickly, let's just take the pectoralis major muscle, for instance. The pectoralis major muscle can accomplish, because of its unique design at the shoulder, it assists in shoulder flexion, it assists in shoulder abduction. Depending on where the joint is beginning a movement at, it assists in shoulder adduction, it assists in shoulder extension, potentially. Its main muscle movement is shoulder horizontal AD and abduction. So realize when the pectoralis major is concentrically contracting, its main muscle movement is going to be shoulder horizontal adduction, and when it's eccentrically contracting, it's going to be accomplishing shoulder horizontal abduction. So that's just a simple for instance of the pectoralis major muscle with its several attachment points in and over to the shoulder, of how this can get complicated really fairly quickly. And then we take that into account for all of the muscles, which we may talk about. You can see kinesiology can get complicated fairly quickly, easy to make mistakes. So, what's a general beginning point? How can we begin to understand and talk about the muscles that are used in a certain type of movement? This is a general rule. This actually came from Dr. Johnson, and I have used it. I like it. I think it is useful as a beginning point, and after that, it can springboard you forward. So the first step is to identify the movement resistance is causing. I want to highlight this with an example. Let's take gravity. Gravity is our most common and our most identified resistance that we go against every day. I want you to imagine for a moment that you're going to sit in a chair. Just with your feet firmly planted on the ground, just begin to sit in the chair so that your knees and your hips just start to bend. And now I want you to imagine for a second that you just fall into your chair. You just crumple into it. So from human anatomical position to crumpling in your chair, what is the osteokinematic motion that occurred? You went from extended at the hips and the knees to flexed. So during sitting, you went to knee flexion and hip flexion. So that's identifying the movement that gravity caused. Now, the second principle, the opposite muscle group is involved. So as we go to sit, we are slowly flexing our knees and slowly flexing our hips. So the muscles that are opposite of knee flexion are going to be our quadriceps. Our quadriceps are what cause knee extension. And so we know that as we sit, our quadriceps are going to be going through an eccentric contraction. Same thing at the hip. Remember, we went into, during sitting, hip flexion. And so our opposite muscle group to our iliopsoas muscles is going to be our glute max. So during sitting, our gluteus maximus is undergoing an eccentric contraction. This is a simple example highlighting this rule. You can use this rule for any type of movement that occurs. And like I said, it's a good springboard. Now, I just wanted to bring in one last idea that is going to further complicate our kinesiology. Just realize the speed of a contraction and the desired goal of a movement often impacts the type of contractions that occur. So this is going to be a soccer kick that's in slow motion, and I'll kind of pause it as I need to. So kicking a soccer ball is a high velocity, high impact type of muscle contraction. So the thing I wanted to, we'll pause it there-ish. The thing I wanted to just highlight quickly. So just realize the goal of this movement is going to be to project this soccer ball. And so what this person is trying to do is to create torque, a lot of torque, about the hip and the knee. I mentioned at the beginning of this video that one of the purposes of muscle contraction is to resist movement. And we actually find out as we study movement that very, very often our body is attempting to resist movement. Complex, fast motions often lead to damage, muscle damage, joint damage. Our body likes to keep things under control as slow as it can while still accomplishing its goals. So the thing I just wanted to highlight quickly is as this person goes to kick this soccer ball, they are going to have a relatively short, high power muscle contraction from the hip flexors and the knee extensors. That is the motion that this person desires to achieve. You'll see that here. Hip flexion, knee extension. That is what they want to go into to project this soccer ball. So they're going to have a short, powerful contraction from the iliopsoas, from the quadriceps, from the rectus femoris muscle to accomplish that motion. But just realize the large majority of this movement is actually going to occur from the backside muscles, from our hip extensors, from our hamstrings, from our gastrocnemius muscle. These are going to be attempting to slow the motion after the goal has been occurred. So even probably as soon as we hit the soccer ball, maybe even a little bit before, these muscles have already started to undergo eccentric contractions to attempt to slow us down so that we don't sustain injury, so that we don't sustain damage. And you'll see that. Slowing down, right? Without that eccentric contraction, that leg would potentially just go and go and go, potentially leading to damage or injury. So this is one further idea that can further complicate kinesiology fairly quickly, is the goal, the speed of contractions. For the purposes of this class, we will try to keep things really pretty simple. Like I mentioned, we're going to focus mainly on agonists. We'll talk a lot about slower, more controlled movements as more of an introduction and a refresher, making sure that we understand and we can competently go through the principles to understand kinesiology.